Here's the pitch everyone believes. Grind up cheap beans, pour them into a cup that sells for $6, do that 1,000 times before lunch, and the profits just pile up on their own. Now here's what actually happened last quarter. To the biggest name in the business. Operating margin dropped to 2.9%, down from 14.4% 1 year prior. More than 4/5 of the profit gone in 12 months. Here is what this actually costs. First, the real estate. Running espresso plumbing, installing proper ventilation, fitting out a seating area, and building a drive-through where the lot allows for it puts leasehold improvements at roughly $500,000 on their own. That number sits comfortably inside Starbucks' own 2020 disclosure filing, which pegged total initial investment anywhere from $228,620 for a small kiosk format to $888,700 for a full-size flagship. Next comes hardware, commercial-grade espresso machines, ovens, refrigerated display cases, and a POS system that can handle mobile order volume. $180,000. Then there's opening stock, coffee beans, milk, syrup, cups and lids, baked goods, retail merchandise. $45,000. Now the part nobody puts in the spreadsheet up front. Health inspections, fire suppression systems mandated around steam and roasting equipment, a grease trap, and ADA-compliant bathrooms. $35,000. And one stalled inspection can delay your opening by a month or more. Pre-opening labor and training. Getting a full team certified on every piece of equipment before opening day. $40,000. Branded signage and interior finishes required to operate under a recognized coffee name. $25,000. A cash cushion to get through the first 90 days, before the store's real traffic rhythm settles in. $75,000. Tally it all and entry cost comes to roughly $900,000, sitting near the top of the company's own disclosed range. That figure arrives before a single drink is served, before the first paycheck goes out, and before one mobile order ever hits the queue. Once the store opens, the costs run continuously. Product and distribution costs come first, because coffee, dairy, and food have to be bought, roasted, or prepared and delivered before any of it reaches a customer. Straight from Starbucks' North America segment disclosures, that's 27.9% of revenue. On a store generating $2.25 million a year, that works out to $627,750. Labor follows right behind, because every drink still gets built by a person. And specialty beverages simply take longer than pouring drip coffee. Extra shots and milk swaps quietly add seconds that stack up across hundreds of orders daily. Wages plus benefits run close to $800,000 a year on that same average store, making labor the largest single expense on the entire list and the most sensitive to wage law changes. Occupancy comes next, because premium, high-visibility real estate isn't cheap whether it's leased or owned, and unlike a big-box retailer, a cafe depends heavily on walk-by visibility to fill seats. About $230,000 annually. Then utilities and in-store overhead, refrigeration that never shuts off, espresso machines drawing power all day long, and payment processing fees on a business where physical cash barely exists anymore. Roughly $117,000, since a cafe is functionally always running. Depreciation follows, because espresso equipment, ovens, and build-outs wear down on a set timeline no matter how the year performed. That's 4.4% of revenue, or about $99,000. Last is corporate overhead, the supply chain, company-owned roasting facilities, marketing budget, and the app infrastructure behind mobile ordering, because no single location is roasting its own coffee or maintaining its own software. 1.8%, or $40,500. Add it together and annual operating costs land near $1,937,250, or 86.1% of revenue. And that's the version where nothing unexpected has happened yet. So where does the revenue actually come from? A typical North America company-operated store brings in about $2.25 million a year, around $6,164 every day of the year, with no closed season. With an average ticket near $7, that's roughly 880 transactions a day, or a new customer arriving about every 66 seconds the store is open. Pull the $1,937,250 in costs from Section 2 out of that revenue, and what remains is about $312,750 in operating profit. That works out to a 13.9% margin in a typical, uneventful year. A decent number, until you remember the figure from the opening. The sector's biggest player just posted a quarter at 2.9%, barely a fifth of that clean year result. Watching a margin drop from 14% to under 3% within a year isn't background noise. Something structural shifted underneath. Coffee comes out of the ground, not a factory, which makes it a commodity, and commodities move faster than a printed menu board can react. Arabica prices jumped roughly 19% across the 12 months ending in late 2025, largely because poor weather hurt yields in Vietnam and Brazil, the two largest producers, while new tariffs pushed importer costs even higher, according to Labor Department inflation data published that November. That increase feeds straight into the $627,750 product cost figure from Section 2, since coffee and dairy together represent more than half of it. A 19% commodity spike adds tens of thousands of dollars per store, with no assurance retail prices can catch up before shoppers switch to drip coffee, start brewing at home, or stop showing up altogether. Add a company-wide labor commitment on top, around $500 million earmarked for expanded wages and scheduled hours going into fiscal 2026, and a business that was recently running a 14% margin can watch it fall below 3% inside a single quarter, which is precisely what unfolded in the quarter ending September 28, 2025, when restructuring charges, coffee price inflation, and that labor spending all hit at the same time. One company already survived this exact combination of pressures at a scale that once made it the biggest retailer in the entire country. It started out selling coffee and tea. It's not around anymore. That company was A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. Founded in 1859 as a mail-order coffee and tea business in Manhattan, it expanded into thousands of standardized, low-price storefronts, and by the 1920s and 30s, it had become the largest retailer in the United States, a position it held for roughly a generation. The fall took decades to play out, not a single bad year. Every attempt to reinvent the format, larger stores, private label brands, changes in ownership, added expense without ever bringing growth back. Online grocery pulled shoppers one way, discount chains undercut on price from another direction, and premium grocers won on quality from a third, and A&P never fully committed to competing on any one of those fronts. The company entered Chapter 11 in 2010, exited in 2012 under new owners, and tried once more to reposition itself. It failed. By 2015, A&P was back in bankruptcy court, and this time it didn't recover. Creditors walked away. Remaining stores were sold off individually to competitors. Hundreds of locations closed for good, and by year's end, a company that had sold coffee and tea for 156 years simply ceased to exist. This wasn't caused by one bad quarter or a single wrong call at the top. It was a company that kept stacking on cost and complexity without ever settling what it was actually trying to be. Precisely the trap thin-margin coffee and grocery retail sets for anyone who stops tracking the fundamentals. Here's a cost that almost never makes it into a first-year forecast: the labor buried inside customization. A plain drip coffee takes about 15 seconds to pour. A heavily customized specialty drink, extra shots, an alternate milk, several syrup pumps, blended ice, can take 2 to 3 minutes to make correctly. Trace one transaction through. A customer orders a $9 custom cold drink on the app. Extra shots, oat milk, 3 syrup pumps, light ice. On paper, that looks like a premium sale carrying strong margin. Exactly the kind of order every revenue model assumes will pull the average ticket higher. But if it takes 3 minutes of a barista's time at a fully loaded wage near $25 an hour, the labor cost baked into that single drink can top $1, nearly triple what a plain drip coffee costs to make. Scale that gap across thousands of similarly complex orders every day, company-wide, and the problem becomes large enough that Starbucks built menu simplification directly into its 2025 Back to Starbucks plan, aimed at clawing back exactly the labor hours customization had been quietly consuming. There's a second cost that has nothing to do with beans or barista time at all, and it's been climbing steadily since 2021. Labor organizing. Since the first union election in Buffalo in December 2021, more than 600 U.S. Starbucks stores have voted to unionize, a wave that began with 3 locations and spread nationwide within just a few years. Over that stretch, more than 1,100 unfair labor practice charges have been filed against the company with the National Labor Relations Board, and in the cases decided so far, NLRB judges have found over 140 violations. That conflict hit a new high in November 2025, with the largest labor action in the company's history. More than 12,000 workers walked off the job across 670 stores in an open-ended strike. Every location affected lost revenue for each day the strike continued, on top of legal costs, back pay orders, and the sheer amount of management time spent defending hundreds of simultaneous NLRB cases across multiple regions. This isn't a cost that fits neatly into a single budget line. A labor relationship this strained can shut down hundreds of stores with almost no warning, and it usually isn't one dramatic event that does it. It's years of unresolved conflict finally breaking loose all at once, across the whole network, inside one news cycle. Certain things genuinely improve at scale. Bean purchasing gets far cheaper by the container ship than by the bag, and long-term supply agreements smooth out volatility no independent café could ever negotiate away on its own. Marketing cost per location drops as brand recognition does the selling automatically, removing much of the customer acquisition expense a brand new café has to cover itself. Landlords start competing for a major brand's foot traffic instead of the brand competing for their space. But other things become harder. Labor disputes turn into national news instead of a single location personnel issue. Menu complexity multiplies training time and equipment needs across every store simultaneously. And commodity exposure, while it shrinks as a share of revenue, balloons in raw dollar terms. A single bad harvest now moves tens of millions of dollars instead of thousands. Beyond a certain size, a coffee company stops behaving like a neighborhood cafe and starts operating like a global commodities and labor relations business that happens to sell lattes. That's a fundamentally different operation than the one priced out in Section 1, run by a fundamentally different team, managing a fundamentally different set of risks. Best case, revenue stays at $2.25 million. Commodity prices don't move. There's no strike activity or litigation. Customization stays manageable, and the cost stack holds at 86.1% of revenue. Operating profit lands around $312,750, a 13.9% margin, a genuinely good year. Worst case, but a realistic one. Coffee and dairy prices rise 19% on the commodity share of the product line, adding roughly $71,500. The company-wide labor investment tax on another $45,000 in wage and scheduling costs at the store level. A day or two of strike activity, along with the scheduling disruption that follows, costs an additional $25,000 in lost revenue and overtime. These rarely arrive one at a time. Commodity spikes, labor tension, and softer demand tend to show up together, since they often stem from the same underlying pressures. Rerun the math, and operating profit falls to roughly $170,800, a margin close to 7.8%, on a store still generating more than $2 million in revenue. The gap between those two outcomes comes down to one commodity spike, one wage investment cycle, and one labor disruption. None of that qualifies as an exotic, rare disaster. All three are unfolding right now, in the same fiscal year, at the same company. Independent cafe and restaurant concepts shut down at a high rate in their early years, and coffee quality is almost never the actual reason. It's cash flow, expansion built on debt, thin reserves, and no plan for a rough commodity year. Recent coffee chain bankruptcies confirm the pattern. A Washington, D.C. chain that grew to 25 locations filed for Chapter 11 in early 2026, citing declining office foot traffic after the pandemic and rising debt. A Black-owned California roaster filed in 2024 following a costly harassment lawsuit, layered on top of years of pandemic-era losses, listing only $250,000 in assets against $3.3 million in liabilities. Different causes, same underlying story, growth or legal exposure that ran ahead of available cash. The operators who last share 5 consistent habits. They keep menus tight enough that labor time per drink stays predictable, instead of letting endless customization quietly erode margin. They contract or hedge coffee purchases ahead of harvest season rather than buying at spot market prices during a spike. They keep real cash reserves instead of financing every stage of expansion with debt. They settle workplace conflicts early before they snowball into a company-wide crisis, rather than fighting every individual case for years across dozens of regions. And they check cost percentages every week instead of every quarter, so a slide from 86% to 90% of revenue in total costs gets caught in the first month, not on the next earnings call. The pitch was one sentence: brew it, sell it, multiply by thousands of cups a day. The reality is a $900,000 entry fee into a business that can fall from a 14% margin to under 3% inside a single quarter, set off by nothing more unusual than a bad harvest and a labor standoff. Coffee retail was never truly a beverage business. It's a commodity and labor risk business that happens to serve lattes. If breakdowns like this one are what you come here for, the subscribe button is right there.